And security expert Sam Phatey joins me from Washington, D.C. to discuss this. Good to have you join us, Sam Phatey.
My pleasure.
Now, I want to begin from the latest development on the Israel-Palestine conflict, and which is the fact that the U.S. government has said that they are working behind the scene for a ceasefire. But this is despite the fact that the U.S. has blocked for the third time this week, for the third time in a week, the UN Security Council resolution calling for an end to the conflict. What do you make of this?
You know, I think there is some disappointment with the Biden administration as to what their step has been. And I think if there's any other politician in the United States that put it right, would be Senator Bernie Sanders. He is actually a Jew himself, and he spoke outright against this. Under his administration, it would have been better, but that's being hypothetical. But in reality, we are dealing with the Biden administration. So it's disappointing having them block these resolutions. And I know many people were saying that it was good that he spoke. It's one thing to speak, but it's another thing to look at what the message that you were trying to say was indicating. And he clearly said Israel has a right to defend itself. Nobody's arguing that. But in this particular statement, that is not the issue to reiterate. What is happening right now constitute what any expert or anybody who knows human rights at law level will constitute war crimes. This is not just about protection at this point. When you are bombarding media houses, you're bombarding schools, and you are bombarding residential areas, claiming that those areas have been used by Hamas to launch attacks on the state of Israel. Hamas, then that's just a mere excuse for your national security, claiming national security. But most of Hamas operations are not just run from Gaza; they actually run out of Gaza.
Some people on the side of Israel, some people have said that, you know, this is an aggressive attack by Israel, but there are those who have also called it retaliatory. But I don't want to focus on the nomenclature of this. I want to look at, you said something about how the Biden administration is responding to this. What do you think is missing in the messaging and in the approach or action?
Well, part of the things that they must do to settle this is two things. They either build on a diplomatic solution that is going to involve the Arab countries in order to achieve the two-party state. Well, having a two states here, one for the Palestinians and one for the Israelis, no longer seems feasible with everything that's going on and with the amount of land that has been taken away from Palestinians in order to have the Israeli settlers come in. I think the Obama administration, which Mr. Biden was the vice president in, did a lot in terms of ensuring that they held Israel accountable, to the extent that Benjamin Netanyahu had to come to the U.S. and address the U.S. Congress attacking President Obama. So the Obama approach really, really worked and held Israel accountable. So it is very, abnormal, if not to say a little bit hypocritical, to see how the Biden administration is in a very lax way responding to this situation. So, he was in the previous administration that took some very serious stance. And if a diplomatic approach is not taken by the Biden administration and ensure that they engage the Arab countries, we might eventually see another war coming. Of course, we saw some Arab countries under the former administration with President Trump trying to build diplomatic relations with Israel. And even recently, there have been talks about diplomatic relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. That would have been a good thing, and it would have been a right-based approach in order to settle this. But with Israel acting with such impunity, then all of those efforts would totally be destroyed and taken away. And if that happens, then there's only one option left, which is an outright war. While, of course, the Biden administration is thinking that they have to engage Egypt by itself, but you need to understand, when it comes to the Arab-Israeli war, it's not just Egypt. There are other primary role players, which includes Jordan, and obviously with the military might of Saudi Arabia and with their nuclear capability, is going to include Saudi Arabia.
And I think those three countries are now working with the U.S. to resolve this. We understand that there was a call between the foreign ministers of these countries and the Secretary of State in the U.S., Antony Blinken, to call for a ceasefire. But before we even look at all of that, let's talk about the peculiar situation of this, especially for diplomacy. Right now, there is no, in quote, credible leadership in Palestine. They have not held elections for the past 15 years. The last election was held in 2006, and there are factions within that, that state. Let's also look at Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is coming from an election where he could not secure a landslide victory. So does all of this add to the difficulty in terms of diplomacy?
It brings a total difficulty. I mean, in fact, talking about diplomacy, we need to understand when it comes to Palestinian politics, it's divided into two. If you talk about Jerusalem area and all of that, you have the PLO, which is really in control of that area, which is the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And then you have, in the Gaza Strip, you have Hamas, and Hamas is a legitimate political party in the Gaza Strip, even though the United States is saying that it is a terrorist group. Of course, the United States labels Hamas as a terrorist group because Hamas in the 1980s, pretty much coming to the early 90s, attacked U.S. bases, including in Lebanon. And as we speak right now, Hamas has strong support, not just in Gaza, but also in Lebanon. The people feel in Lebanon and in Gaza that Hamas is their protection, that they are protecting them and they are fighting for them, whether you are Muslim or Christian. And you know, Lebanon has a very interesting mix of Shia Muslims and Sunni Muslims and Christians. So they feel like Hamas is being protected to them. So it's that if you want, you might have a policy of saying we are not going to negotiate with terrorists, but in conflict, that is just a political statement. In conflict, that's not the reality. At the end of the day, when the conflict has reached this stage, they have no other option if they want to attain peace between Israel and the Arabs. I'm not just going to say Palestine, but the Arabs. Then they have to engage Hamas. They have to engage the PLO, and they also have to engage the other countries within the Arab League. They all have critical roles to play here. Perhaps it's a little bit disappointing that the Arab League, while trying to take a diplomatic stand on this matter, a lot of people are feeling disappointed that they should have taken a more critical stand, a more stronger stand, and even not just to threaten military action, but to prepare to fully engage militarily in order to protect the people of Palestine. And many Palestinian supporters, including Palestinians, are now saying that they felt like they are alone, and they already felt this coming when some Arab countries started diplomatic relations with Israel. So the politics and the diplomacy of it is very complicated, and you cannot exclude Hamas, and that's what they are doing.
Sam Phatey, we'll continue to see how things play out in the coming days and if there is going to be a ceasefire in the nearest future. Security expert Sam Phatey, thanks for talking to us.
My pleasure.